Thanks everybody, and welcome. This is the Amy Center meeting, and I'm very glad you all could join us. So my name is Matt Lungren. I'm the co-director of the Amy Center, and I serve along with Kurt Langlotz and our executive director, Joanna Kim. For those of you out there who may be joining us for the first time, just a little bit about the Stanford Amy Center. We've been around since 2018, so relatively new. We started out in the radiology department with pretty much just a handful of faculty, and we've seen ourselves grow to now over 120 different faculty members across the university. And then we have this rapidly growing industry and academic partnership across the world, and it's really been exciting. Some of those industry partners are represented here today. Our core research and education mission is really sort of focused around I guess a deliberate, multidisciplinary team-based science, really where we bring people with all kinds of expertise and backgrounds from clinical and the computer science and engineering worlds together. And that's, I think, been our secret sauce on how we've managed to sort of impact the field and really help address some of the clinically important problems with these machine intelligence technologies. Another big component to our success is really that we're centered in the heart of Silicon Valley, which is like, the birthplace of so many incredible tech giants, these disruptive innovations that really have almost become a cliche, I think, to some extent. I describe this as like a high-tech Hollywood, where instead of inspiring actors and screenplays, it's really the next killer app, and I've got a unicorn, company. And there's a little bit of that. But I think that maybe more telling, given the things that are going on right now, is Silicon Valley is regarded as a tech bubble, one that I think in recent times refers more to this. I want to say a profound disconnect with the rest of the country and maybe the world. And I think that possibly the sense of detachment has really exacerbated some problematic blind spots. And those blind spots are important issues around privacy, racial and gender biases, and wealth inequality, which is certainly acute where we live. And I guess just because our organization is small, we're not a Facebook or a Twitter, we don't have that kind of influence. I think we still believe that we can use our leadership positions and our platform to find a way to amplify and support initiatives that, in this case, potentially foster diversity and equity, and to really find a way a path forward to model and be a reflection of the society that we want to live in going forward. And so, this discussion for us is going to be the first of many towards what is going to be a solid commitment towards the work needed to really just get to that sustainable change, and hopefully actively foster an environment that reflects those changes. And, ideally in the long run, but not just in this moment, of course, when the issues are in the news and the passions are very high, but really for future moments, day in, day out, like the actual sustainability piece of that. So we think that with all the brilliant innovators that we have, that we should be able to capture this and really rally together and really refocus ourselves on some shared values that are around fairness and equity and justice and opportunity. So anyway, I'll kind of start moving the discussion forward. I'm really excited to have a great lineup of panelists from Microsoft and Nines Radiology, of course, and I'm especially glad to be joined by Judy Gichoya, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Radiology at Emory and an interventional radiologist and an absolute rock star in radiology AI. We really appreciate the fact she was able to spend time with us today and help host the discussion. I think about Judy and I, we see each other in person fairly infrequently, but every time we do this, I think it's been completely every single time. We see each other, we're excited to catch up. We start talking Tuesday at a meeting, and we chat, and then we look up, and then everyone's gone, the conference hall's closed down, and we run out of time to talk. So I always take any opportunity to find a way to connect, and so I'm really happy to have her here. With that, maybe I'll kick it over to you, Judy, to introduce yourself, and then we'll have the panelists introduce themselves, and we'll have a discussion. And for those of you in the audience who have questions as they come up, please feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll try to do our best to get to them and moderate that.
Thank you, Matt. You're always trying to scare me, but I'm not scared yet. And it's an absolute pleasure to have this conversation this evening. And I think I would just like to start with a disclaimer that, if you're on the in the virtual meeting to, sometimes it's always, when you're giving, especially talks on diversity, it's really just our own experiences and the people around us, and we cannot really speak for everyone because we know that everyone's experience is just so unique. And, sometimes what you may miss may sort of, like maybe not so important to you and not your experience, but it's really like weighing someone else down. So we just really want to acknowledge that as we kick off. It's a fantastic day. It's a fantastic day for someone on the call who would not agree with my use of fantastic, but it's a great day because I think over the last 3 days, we've seen Google, Amazon, and Microsoft say, put a moratorium on use of their technology for policing, because facial technology for policing. So this is a big, big move. But at the point of this, I actually know some of the researchers who did this work, and they faced a lot of shame. If you looked even right now on Twitter, they were told, are they real, engineers? What have they contributed really to AI? And so it's, as much as we celebrate this win at the end, we know that it's a long, painful journey. And so I'm hoping that this panel can at least achieve two things. One is that if there is any person, whether you're a person of, especially really if you're a person of color who's really feeling that the weight of the world is on your shoulders right now, that you can just hear a little bit of your comfort and see someone of your tribe among this group. And second is to really use the words of one of my mentors and a good friend of mine who says that how do we create good allies for people in tech and working on these issues every day, so that it's okay to ask, Judy, is that your real hair or not, without feeling, is this a bad question to ask or not, and just to give practical insights on how to be a good and a true ally. So with that, let's start with Dr. Melissa Davis, who's going to be my colleague in 3 weeks at Emory, to introduce yourself and just tell us what you're excited about today.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Judy, for having me on this panel. I am the VP of Clinical Operations for Nines Radiology. My background is I'm a neuroradiologist, and for the past 3 years before coming to Nines, I ran the emergency radiology department at Yale. And I'm also very excited to be joining Judy at Emory starting July. So there's a lot of transitions that are happening right now. But I'm really excited to be a part of this panel, mostly because I'm new to the Silicon Valley region, even though, like I told Matt earlier, I didn't actually physically get there because of COVID. But I'm excited about the people that I've met within this industry. Even coming into this, I recognize that there is a significant lack of diversity when it comes to underrepresented minorities within the AI space, within the technology space, and within a lot of spaces that I've spent my career in. So I'm interested to learn from you all as well as share my experiences.
Okay. Thank you and welcome. Ohi, there is, I'm a fellow African too, but there is something, the sweet sounds of hand throwing. Could you introduce yourself and tell us what this is? I'm really...
I copy and pasted that if I should edit it. Hand throwing is just like slang for boxing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So my name is Ohi, and I am a recent Stanford graduate. I did applied math and mechanical engineering. I'm currently a software engineer at Nines. I think what I'm going to talk about here mostly, based on my experience, is not going to be maybe larger policy changes, but I think the thesis of my statements is going to be forget your feelings, and how that sort of concept can apply to helping people be good allies, and making it so that right now we have a big movement to turn back a lot of big policies that would happen because a lot of people within the groups weren't aware enough to stop them from happening to begin with. So how can this idea of forget your feelings lead to people being able to make environments where people of color can prosper, and then have environments where this is maybe going forward sustainably, just always account for potential biases. So that's what I'm excited to talk about today.
Awesome. And I'll have Tina introduce herself next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tina Eskridge. I currently lead our inclusive marketing and product strategy for cloud at Microsoft. Really happy to be here today. Thank you for the outreach and the invitation. Mostly because, as you mentioned, Dr. Gichoya, I think I'm aligned with you in thinking that this is a fantastic time because I do think it is a time for change. I'm a repeat techie. I started my career in tech, well, actually in retail, but then in tech back in '97. And so I've worked for several tech companies on and off along the way. And, I'm encouraged by the changes that have been made, but I know that there need to be many, many more. But again, I do think, if you asked me last week, I wouldn't have said that it was a fantastic time. But I'm now starting to see the momentum building with companies like our own, making changes and decisions that change the systemic problems that we see each and every day. And so I'm happy again to just be here to listen, learn, and contribute in any way that I can. So thank you for having me.
Thank you and welcome. Nate.
Yes. Well, good afternoon. First, I want to thank our friends at Stanford University for organizing this. Joanna for her hard work and commitment to rally some folks around a relatively short notice. I certainly want to thank you for that. And ironically, I was rushing back to my apartment here in Seattle because I was just at the radiologist. I sprained my ankle running, and I realized there's no prescription for older age. That Nate that was playing soccer when he was a kid, I can't really do the same things he did at one point. But certainly, I want to thank you all for your hard work and your commitment to the sciences. I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer by training. I was a Wall Street lawyer, and then spent time in President Obama's administration, several roles across the 44th president's administration, and had the fortune of being able to work in technology after the 22nd Amendment fired us. We got 2 terms, and it's time for us to leave. And so I joined Microsoft on several capacities, driving business development, which is really M&A and strategic partnerships in San Francisco. And then about a year, September, I moved to Seattle to join AI engineering. And so, Dr. Gichoya, I do want to put a disclaimer. Although I'm a lawyer, I do got to put a disclaimer that I'm on the working team that is driving Microsoft's policy for computer vision and surveillance. And so, today was certainly, I would say, a good start to a relatively progressive road to making sure that our algorithms respect humans, just like how we should all respect humans. And so, I do want to just say that I will touch on that lightly, but I don't want to double click too hard on that. And so I drive product management for AI at Microsoft.
Awesome. Nice to have you today. I would say, Dr. Lungren, introduce yourself, but we're worried you'll take up all the time. So we're going to just put a pause on that. Ohi, you talked about feelings. There has been a lot of feelings. I can tell you that, there has been white, Dr. Davis here would understand, and by the way, you can call me Judy. There has been many, many feelings. There has been white coats for Black Lives. I'm actually rocking my Black Lives Matter t-shirt now. So there has been many, many feelings. Could you just speak a little bit about what I would just say in my house, taking it and just waking up and starting a new day afresh? Just tell us what you're feeling right now. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you what to say, but
so when I said forget your feelings, I wasn't speaking necessarily about waking up and ignoring things going forward. I was speaking about how I say this. So I think what's happening right now is that there's been a topic that most of America has not engaged in until something made it to happen. And the reason it didn't engage in it for the most part is because it was an uncomfortable topic. And so what feelings are is feelings take away context, right? So, and I have people reach out to me now, but we talked about racism in the past. What would happen is people would go away from the context and zoom into something and be it's not that bad. And so this video came out and it was just so bad that people were oh wow, I need to go out my comfort zone. And so what I'm saying about forget your feelings is that same ethos has to be applied on an individual level to how you perceive yourself. So I, for example, try to be an ally to women in STEM, but I didn't get to that point until I told myself I was sexist. And it's not a good thing to tell yourself, oh my gosh, I'm this, because it feels not great. But if you like take a step back and you look at context, not just go, oh, but I'm not bad to this person or whatever, then you start to like see your own actions, and you start to be able to go, oh, this is how I do this on a regular basis. And you start to like just be a better ally. And then you start to like be able to make a space for people to be like comfortable around you and to like be able to be them true selves around you. And in some ways then be able to like voice their opinions and contribute to like organizations. So like when I forget your feelings is like your feelings make you want to be comfortable. And if this is going to be a thing that is actual, you have to like realize when you're trying to be comfortable and take a step back, see context, and just acknowledge that you might, in this situation, money situations, make a mistake. Obviously, I still make mistakes, but like I just like acknowledge it to myself and then internalize it and go forward. So that's what I mean by like forget your feelings in that context.
Okay. Any other thoughts about Ohi's, forget your feelings?
I will say, Ohi, I really resonate with the idea of being extreme in saying and identifying yourself as such, and getting away from the comfortability, because I do think that is part of the problem when you think about the context of what's going on right now. We're putting other people's discomfort ahead of resolution. And so I think that is a perfectly said statement. For me, I think, as I mentioned at the start, my emotions have gone back and forth over the last couple of weeks because, as was mentioned, this is not new for many of us, right? We've seen, the state of racism in America, particularly, repeat itself over and over and over again. There are so many names that people just don't know. We've only heard the few that have been mentioned in the media over the last week, but we see this on a fairly consistent basis. So, I think at this time it's really important to focus on not making bold statements and not just putting money out there, but really taking individual assessment. And by individual, I mean, within the systems and organizations in which we work and live, and making change there, because that's where it starts.
Awesome. Tina, I just want to sort of piggyback on your comment with another question. Specifically, you have been in tech for a long time. I mean, and what I mean is that, if you started in the 90s, you've just seen so much, change in terms of the capabilities. It's almost, like growing up in a village and then there's a city, it just, this blows your mind in terms of the possibilities. And so what I at least realize is that there are some times to speak, and then there are times to let others speak for you. Could you give us an insight to what that may look like? And specifically right now, if you may be too junior in your career or just starting out, and if you start to be too loud, I'm using my, some quotation marks, that may be sort of even stifle your career progress. And so there's something about timing. Do you have any thoughts about sort of how to be, to think about timing and what that means for allies, for people who can speak for others, and not because they can speak on their behalf, but just because the positions that they have allow them to be able to be other people's voices?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Particularly right now, and if you look at many of the marches, if you think about the marches that happen across the country and even all over the world, many of them were minority African American and Black in cities like our city here, Seattle, and others. And that's the first time I've really seen that. And particularly something that expanded worldwide, where you had allies marching on our behalf for the injustices that happen, because it's a human rights issue. It's not, it's not just, confined to policing, right? And when you think about when is the right time to speak, I think now more than ever, it's time for everybody to speak up, no matter where you are in your career. I know that it can be uncomfortable, but I'm starting to see, even in my own circles, the younger folks being more emboldened in what they're saying, what they're doing. and their approach to this. And then, for those of us that are more senior, being strategic and thoughtful. But I also want to see, to your point, our allies speak on our behalf more so in corporations and government, because the last thing I want to do is fix a problem that I did not start. I didn't create it, and so to be asked, Tina, what should we be doing it's a little insulting, particularly at a time like now. I want to see people actually do the work, and the work is really critical, and that's why I liked what Ohi said earlier about like being extreme in how you really assess yourself, because if you don't do the work, I always say, proximity is the greatest equalizer, for empathy, right? You have to have some proximity. And what you find today is for those allies that, they may be, super bold and passionate, but they still don't have proximity. You haven't gone out to learn what it means, or looked at, the laws and the systems that, confine us as African American or Black Americans, right? And if you haven't taken the time to do those things, you can't be a good ally. You can't use your voice, or you won't know how to use your voice if you don't educate yourself. So I think right now it's time for everybody to not only listen, but to learn and yes, speak up.
Awesome. Well, it's very hard to follow those really amazing words. Nate, you're a lawyer. You have done a lot of surveys. You've, government, industry, at the forefront of this. What do you think specifically actually about even self-education to be an ally, and just some of the things that people can do to be strong allies and for people of color?
Sure. Well, first, Dr. Judy, I got to call you out. I'm African as well, from Eritrea. So folks on the call, East Africa.
Oh my! But you don't wanna bring soccer right now.
Yeah.
That's like football, other world football. But then I'm just gonna keep away the politics. But
yes. Well, a couple things. I think first, in terms of initial reactions, certainly I would say that many of us are not confused and well aware that the leading cause of death for African American men between the age of 25 to 29 are police officers. In fact, there was a study from Dr. Matthews University of Michigan, in partnership with Rutgers, did this study. And so, when I see this in this massive level of what I call trendy empathy, I'm hoping that's going to be a lifestyle. Certainly, COVID has had a detrimental impact to the African American community as unemployment rate continues to go up for African Americans, or for Caucasian, it continues to go down. But also what COVID has forced the world to stare at the TV and see the lived experiences of Blacks because of the democratization of cell phones with cameras. And so here we have it where there's very little distraction. Dr. Judy mentioned football or soccer. Well, that doesn't exist right now, right? The American people, the world is effectively focused on what's occurring, that's always been occurring, and it's been systematically embedded in law. And so in regards to how do we drive allyship, I think it takes the individual first to figure out in themselves, do they want change to see? Because you have a lot of Me Too leaders, not in the sense of the movement, the hashtag Me Too, but Me Too leaders who are following what others are doing because it's trendy right now. But we got to, sit back and take notes. It's like building technology. You see an unmet, unarticulated need or an opportunity, and then you get smart at it. When you ship product, you get smart on it. It's driven by customer signal. How we're going to go to market. What are our key metrics to this? Throwing money at a problem without results, where's the goalpost, will get you nowhere. It's a road to nowhere. When I'm shipping a product or my team shipping a product, we have to get really smart at it and define what the success look like. And then what are the potential unintended consequences of this? I always say that Mark Zuckerberg and his friends at Harvard in their dorm when they created Facebook, they were not intending 10, 15 years later that Facebook would have the biggest detrimental impact to the strongest democracy in the world, called the United States of America, in 2016-17 election. So here we have where we have to get smart at it. But I think before we drive to who's an ally, allies must sit back and say, do they want change to occur? Are you willing to invest in this? Because, too many times as Black professionals, there's a double tax. You have to be successful on what your job description indicates. You have to effectively do better in order to get promoted. And then there's this double tax of folks reaching out, and somehow I become an expert as a chief diversity officer. And we have to realize that to whom much is given, much is expected. And I'm reminded of that every single day. But at the same time, it takes coalitions to defeat such a complicated problem, a systematic problem. And so I think before we drive into how do we drive allyship, I think folks need to take some time to self-reflect. Do they want change to occur? The obvious is yes. But when you double click on actions, it speaks louder than words. So.
Okay, awesome. We're still going on with the questions, but I would like to encourage all the attendees, please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and I will ask it on your behalf. Dr. Davis, you have recently, every day, you are retweeting. Please, if you need someone to talk to, if you're overwhelmed, especially because you straddle two fields, tech and radiology, which are, two areas that have very few Black people and even fewer Black women. And so could you tell us sort of, this is your step, and I recognize your leadership in this. You're not saying, hey, I'm backed by this organization to do this, because you realize that we have to all do something. But I want to hear what your thoughts are and what your reactions are to the previous speakers.
Yeah, I resonate with a lot of what everybody said so far. Like you mentioned, like my background, like yours, is medicine. And if you've ever gone through medical training, it's very militaristic in a way. You're constantly putting your feelings aside in order to like get through the day, essentially. And like residency is very, very hard for a lot of us. And so when Nate was talking about the double tax, that really resonated with me, especially over the past week, because the fact is that there isn't much diversity in medicine. There's not that much diversity in tech. And so you're constantly, if somebody wants to figure out like, how do I be equitable? How do I increase inclusion? You're naturally the first person that people go to, because they're like, this is what it looks like, even if it's not true, And so I spent a lot of time last week, or even before this, like when I saw that Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down in Georgia, when we saw that Breonna Taylor, her house was busted into and she was shot dead, and when we saw that like George Floyd was murdered in the street, I basically was like, it's going to be like another thing where like maybe we will protest a little bit. It's mostly going to be Black people out there, and we're all going to forget about it, because that's what happened with Tamir Rice. That's what happened with, a slew of other people before this. Like, this is nothing new. But I have been, pleasantly surprised by the energy that has come behind this over the past week after George Floyd, because it wasn't just Black people seeing this, it was everybody seeing it and everybody jumping in and saying, what can we do? But what I did notice over the past week is that there are a lot of non-Black people who this is a surprise for. And they were like, we did not know that this was happening. And so that naturally requested of Black people to start sharing their experiences. And when I share my experience, it's very emotional for me. It takes a lot of my energy. It takes away from the job that I actually am supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis. And I had a couple of residents reach out to me and say, I'm in a program where I'm the only Black person, and they just asked me to be on the diversity task force. They've been asking me all these questions all week long. I don't really want to do it because I got to get through residency. I got to like get through my day-to-day. I got to, I've got this model I'm working on. And so I decided just to put out there like, look, I don't have the answers to all this, but I understand that experience. And sometimes you just like need a safe space to debrief in. And I think like one thing that we haven't really talked about so far is how do we create safe spaces within our organizations? I don't think that we're very good at doing that because, as several people have stated, talking about race is considered an unsafe topic or an uncomfortable topic, where we actually know that growth happens in the midst of being uncomfortable. Like that's where you actually grow. So that's where we actually need to be. But at the same time, you need to step up and like protect the people who this may be harder for. And so my mission with those tweets last week was really just to create that space for people who may not have that space in their organizations. Like we're tweeting about it, we're giving money to it, but like, again, like Nate said, what are the actual actionable things that we're doing to make things better in our own spaces?
I will agree with Matt that we speak a lot. Finally, when I got on his Slack channel, and so Dr. Lungren, what's your reaction? Well, how are you feeling? And I may sort of probe a little bit because we've been speaking, but what's going on with you right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been, just ongoing. I think this has been a discussion that, we have this urge to just want to jump in and just fix it, right? There's this immediate urge that just says, I have to fix something. I have to, whatever it takes, do anything. And I think that part of that's the impulse of just feeling uncomfortable and wanting it to be done and fixed. And, we can, can society continue to just get better? Why does it have to be like this? I think that that's, something that is what I'm trying to, trying to repress that impulse. I think it's important now to just have the opportunity to really just listen, invest my, time and do whatever I think I can possibly do to sort of support this moment that some have mentioned already is really starting to look like we're seeing actual change. A piece of momentum seems to be happening. There seems to be an awareness, and how can we continue that forward without coming up with quick fixes that just kind of I guess in some ways stall that. And so it's really this balance of listening to the experiences and understanding where we can actually continue to have an impact in the right ways. And, again, using some of the things at our disposal. In this case, we work on, different types of initiatives with the center, but also just in our daily lives with tech. We interact with people in tech all the time. How can we influence those cultures in that, sort of someone mentioned earlier, the proximity idea, right? How can we use our proximity to actually affect the change and see that those dominoes continue to fall, right? And see that everyone's sort of starting to pull in the same direction. And I think that's where, at least I'd like to sort of put it on the table to say that, I'm committed. I'm trying to find a way to be an ally and to make this something that actually happens for good, for a longer period of time.
Thank you. I'm curious. So we, a few weeks ago, so we've been dealing with COVID for the last 3 months. I have to use the word COVID, Dr. Lungren, but we have been dealing with, what 2020 has been pretty surprising. At least I feel that way. When I started this year, I did not think 2020 would be this roller coaster. But one, at some points to reopen and remove sort of like the social distancing, not remove the social distancing, but sort of this idea that contact tracing is so important. Big companies, which also was new, we started to see companies want to work together to build technology for contact tracing. I'd like to hear reactions about this now. Because we know the same technology, and we've had very, very vocal people, Ruha Benjamin, who's written a book on sort of like, tech and sort of what that can impact people of color. And so what I would like to hear a reaction from the panelists. Are there softwares that we shouldn't build? How do we are there things that we should build, and how should we build them? Because quite a large majority of this panel is of builders. We are end users, but we build things. And I'm curious to hear what the panelists think. I'm not going to pick on anyone. I'm done doing that.
Yeah, Judy, I've been thinking about this idea of like contact tracing, since the beginning of COVID, because, somebody mentioned earlier, like unintended consequences. Like, what are the unintended consequences of building something like that, where you can basically trace everybody across the country? In COVID, we know like essential workers are largely like underrepresented, are minority workers or poor workers. Like, they're the people in your meatpacking plants, they're the people at the grocery stores, they're your janitorial staff at your hospitals doing all the cleaning. They are the nursing staff. Those people, if they don't work, they don't live. Like, you don't have a place to live, you don't have anything to eat, you can't like feed your children. And so this idea behind contact tracing, I could see it as a place where, like, okay, I get coronavirus, I go to I have contact with my cousin who is a grocery store worker. She's not going to work for like 3 to 6 months because somebody's like, oh, well, you've been in contact with this person, and so now you're on the street. And so I think that when we're building these technologies, we really have to think about not just like the technological consequences, but like the social consequences as well. And, that's where Facebook went off the rails, as was described earlier.
So, but just to piggyback on top of that, I also think we should be also shedding light to the reality. We're giving our data away. This mobile device is a massive tracker. If you go through your applications and look at location services always on, we're giving our device. We're giving our location services. We're effectively permitting that. It's happening right now. It's a cultural thing. And when we're driving, doing business in Asia and certainly in Europe as well, unfortunately, I've yet to have the privilege of doing business in Africa, and I'm confident Microsoft will change that with my hard work with my friend Tina here, who's driving some great efforts around that. But in Europe, culturally speaking, Europeans do not feel comfortable with the private sector having their data, but are okay with the government having their data. Here in the US, it's the exact opposite, right? I respectfully submit that I allow Instagram to have my data. I try to keep the location services off on most of my applications, but the bottom line is I know that there's a couple apps on my phone that I've slipped through the crack where they're having my data everywhere I go, right? Now, the question becomes our comfort of providing the government with access to this data. Historically speaking, when there's a traumatic incident that happens, government's authority here in the United States increases 9/11. We saw what happened with the Patriot Act. Certainly instances throughout the Obama administration, through acts of terrorism, and of course with COVID-19. People are pointing to Korea as kind of the perfect child of how they leverage tracking data in order to pause COVID-19. China and Korea claim that there hasn't been a net new case yet. First of all, I question that data. But in regards to our comfort of as the American people, especially as we go into an election that is a very sensitive topic around our data and leverage of social media platforms and fake news, and providing the government with access to a lot of it is something we have to self-reflect. Is our privacy worth more than our current health right now? And that's something that it's a contested debate that I don't want to really get into because we only have 20 minutes left, but really something that we should all self-reflect, because this mobile device is already tracking us. So.
Ohi, Tina, any reactions to this?
Yeah, I agree with both Melissa and Nate on this topic. And I think, at the end of the day, and Nate's absolutely right. I mean, everything we do right now is already being tracked. It's just about the principles behind it. And I think the same principles, I would never want to be in a place where we, where we restrict technology or restrict innovation, right? So I think it's a good thing for us. It's just how do we use it, and what types of constraints do we put in place? Is it the same principles apply as they do in AI, right? Are we using it to be fair and impartial? Are we transparent about that data and how it's used? Because Melissa gives a very good example of those that will be, impacted if they are socioeconomically disadvantaged and or marginalized by way of their ethnic background, right? Like that is a very real scenario. So how are we being responsible and accountable when we're thinking about using those technologies? I don't think it's altogether bad. I don't think it's good. I think it can be constructive, but only with some parameters in place. Otherwise, it will not do any good, and we'll be in the same situation we're in today with the artificial intelligence that's been used for police departments. Right? We don't want to go there.
Okay. Ohi, you're building stuff.
Yes, I'm building stuff. I will give an anti-builder answer. I do actually think that there are some things like innovation individually in companies, fine, but I do think there should be like generally restraints on how things are used. I think for me, the biggest example is I used to work in a robotics lab, and I was talking to people about how robots can like get people out of jobs, and they're like, oh yeah, they can just learn new jobs. And they grew up, obviously, I think they grew up in like some good part of like Berkeley. So I was like, that's crazy. How can people in like Pittsburgh blue collar just like learn new skills, right? Like this is not how it actually works in real life. So I would say technology, like building and how it's applied widespread, should be constrained in some way.
So, I think clearly everyone can see that there's a little bit of not consensus. Everyone is sort of right with their perspective. And as someone who grew up actually in Kenya, I want to say that the first time Facebook really came, we had these internet bundles. And as long as you used Facebook, internet was free. And so there's selective policies. And so I think we must remember, like Dr. Davis is saying, that the technology never works in isolation, because if I can only use one thing for free and I have to pay maybe to call someone, and now you have a messenger, then I'm only going to use that thing for free. And so that empowers companies, that empowered businesses to run on Facebook. I have done a lot of global health, and initially I know that people build even some sort of consulting services or some healthcare thing on Facebook. No one would have anticipated that. I mean, I'm not anti any company. I'm just trying to give a situation here, and no one would have anticipated that there would be a big anti-vaccine movement, which would render some of these businesses where incentives were lowered so that they can use a platform and, to sort of be oppositional to what the principles of the initial companies were. And so I saw the same, when I was going through medical school, that during my clinical years, that's when Kenya was struggling a lot with HIV/AIDS. And initially, medical records numbers had a little, just a little bit. Actually, it was because of clinical reminders, because we had to print them for patients. They were on pink sheets, okay? And when people went home, I haven't disclosed my status to my spouse, but now I'm coming home with a pink sheet. And with time, people knew pink sheets. You only get a pink sheet because you need reminders and because you're HIV positive. And so these sheets started to be dropped in the market because I don't want to go home with it if I have a status that's not disclosed. And so the technology, when we think of just the individual technology, it's always built in a little bit of a bubble and a vacuum, without thinking of, Dr. Davis's cousin who may be out of a job, and, or where we see loss of jobs and say, gee, you could apply for unemployment, but there's a lot of pride in just having a job in people who've always had a job for the rest of their lives. And so I'm going to move to some of the questions on the panel. On the chat, anonymous attendee is asking, acknowledging the double burden, And so they apologize for asking about this. What efforts have you seen employers make that are impactful with respect to diversity and inclusion and anti-racism?
I'll start by saying I don't know that any employer has been all too impactful, at least in the tech space, or else we wouldn't be where we are right now circumstantially, right? We wouldn't be talking about these things, or the lack of numbers of minorities and leadership positions and so on and so forth. But I will say, you know, to the points that were made earlier, you know, companies are now, particularly right now, they're pivoting really hard towards that introspective lens that we were talking about, where, you know, they're asking employees to do the work. They're putting out resources, materials, and saying, you know, please, you know, and in some cases it's guided, in some cases it's self-guided. But, you know, companies like our own, that's one approach that's being taken. In addition to, you know, using data. Data is really critical, and, you know, in many cases, most D&I departments have not been altogether transparent about what those numbers really look like, and, you know, what's the impetus behind some of the problems, or the lack of individuals in certain seats in the company really looks like. And so now we're starting to see more transparency around the data, which helps to drive forward an action plan or a model that remedies it at the end of the day. But again, we're not there yet. I think everybody has a lot of work to do, both individually and systemically, particularly in the tech space.
Awesome.
Yeah, and just to, you know, just a plus one with my friend Tina has indicated, I'm a highly data-driven individual. And I just need to look at the numbers, not numbers in terms of how many folks of color or women are in positions, promotion, management, and high priority engagements. In corporate America, you know, I have to step back my own lived experience, because I've had a very, you know, very positive, you know, corporate journey. Same with, you know, obviously Tina is some of the most senior Black folks at Microsoft, and I've had mentors, and that's really imperative for success. It doesn't matter what industry you are, mentors to help you along your journey. And my mentors, you know, look like the world. But in regards to, if I were an investor, or you know, or if I were to acquire a company, and I looked at it as a SaaS offering called Diversity as a Service, I wouldn't invest a penny into it. I don't see a clear product roadmap. I don't see the metrics. There may be some dollars behind it, but no one who's really PMing it the way it should be PM'd. As well as, you know, diversity, what I've noticed is a lot of happy hours, marketing commercials, a lot of calories, really, you know, also maybe a luncheon with the CEO. It's a very, very calorie consuming process, wining and dining. But in regards to getting to the meat of the product, it's just not there because it doesn't have the metrics of exactly how we deploy a solution. You know, look at, I have several Caucasian friends. I have friends from all around the planet. But like Caucasian males who were in Capitol Hill and these state and local offices had the intelligence to write policies that were incredibly successful at disenfranchisement and institutional racism. Use that same intelligence to get us out of here. It's not like we wrote the rules. I mean, you had the intelligence to write these laws that were extremely successful. Folks on Capitol Hill who wrote these laws were extremely successful. So use that intellect to write policy to get us out. You did it once. Do it again. Get us out. I've spent many, many years in Washington. I know the key players on the Hill. These laws were written by Caucasian males. They had the intellect to drive a successful program. Now it's time for them to step up and get us out.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I do have, I think, what is a success story, but it's not in the tech space. It's not in it's in the nonprofit space. I'm on a board of a nonprofit in Connecticut, and maybe about 5 years ago, they said, we are operating in a white supremacist way, is what they said, like at the CEO level. And we need to change that because the people that we're serving, because this is a healthcare organization, are people of color, are people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. And there's no way that we can relate to our customer base if we are operating in this way that promotes a supremacist culture. And so they have spent like the last 5 years really digging into what that means for their organization and where they can move from there. And that has required a lot of work from the top to the bottom, where they have, as a board member, I sat in on a weekly session with them where people from across the organization learned how to talk to each other, learned how to express their feelings, learned how to call things out. And then from there, they created a strategic mission for how we were going to get from point A to point B. And they're not there yet, and they recognize they aren't there yet, but I think they've made more progress than anyone else that I've seen. And then about 2 years into their organizational journey, they looked at their board and they said, what does our board look like? Our board, like a lot of nonprofits, are a bunch of rich white people because we need money, and they have all the money. But is that actually who we want making board level decisions for us? And so they started really looking at how we recruit people to the board. What are the conversations that we have with potential board members, asking them, do they understand like what equity and inclusion means, and creating a task force on our board that really digs into that. And we have metrics for what that means. So one of the metrics, which I think is most important, is how comfortable are you in this space? And when we started this journey, everybody tanked because we were having really difficult conversations and nobody felt comfortable coming to meetings because we knew it was going to be a hard conversation. But over time, our comfort level has increased again because like now we're comfortable with sharing our experience, with having discussions. We created an equity tool. So every discussion or every decision that we have to make, we have questions that we have to ask. Who is this going to impact? Who's it going to impact negatively? Who's it going to impact positively? Have we thought of all the stakeholders? We have questions like that we have to ask for every decision that we make. And I think that that's made a tangible difference in our organization.
Wow. Ohi, any thoughts?
Yes, I think so. There's a question also about why there are so few Black people in major in computer science in college. And I think I can duel this one.
Yes.
One thing that I did when I was in Stanford was I did even in my undergrad, I did like a survey of different graduate and college programs and which STEM programs had the most diverse candidates. And I think like some of the things I noticed about programs that are successful is that a lot of those programs had clear and objective marks for how you evaluate people to get into your program and then how you evaluate them going through your program. In my personal life, this has also made a big difference. So like when you have your own like implicit sort of biases, then what can happen is that you can see the same performance, but then evaluate very differently if you don't have a clear metric. And so like, I think like, so modeling that, like colleges and even advisors for me that do that tend to do better with people who are underrepresented in your group. For me, like an example is I was in one lab where like this was not the case. And then I left that lab. And when I went to the next lab, I got a best paper award, published a paper and graduate in like 3 or 4 years. Now, I didn't like suddenly become like 10 times better at research, right? I just went from an environment where like there was no clear anything. And so a lot of implicit biases could be looked at how about he evaluate my work, et cetera, et cetera. So one where people were just like, oh, these are metrics and what benchmarks. I don't care if you think like me. I don't care if you get the exact how to get there. You just meet this metrics and benchmarks and then you're good. And so I think like that is one big way. Another way is like a lot of people like who do well also recruit from HBCUs. And I think like most like tech companies and most big company like schools try and go to like MIT, Stanford, Princeton, Yale, all of which are places where people who are rich tend to go, which would mean like obviously not that many like underrepresented people. And so like HBCUs, not just Howard, but like North Carolina, A&T, et cetera, like places to recruit there also tend to do well. So I think this isn't like fully into tech culture yet, but I think like that model of like objective benchmarks for evaluating and hiring people and then recruiting from different type of places is something that can have like a good amount of success. And it's also something that can increase the amount of people in computer science majors in college, which I think was a question someone had in the chat.
Great. So there's one more question, and then I just want to wrap up, and we have 5 more minutes. And please send more questions. They can be answered after this session, and you'll get an answer. During discussions at Stanford, I'm just reading this because it's a little long. During discussions at Stanford about reopening during COVID-19, someone said, and the panelists can actually see this question, if someone sees you without a mask in your lab and tells you the correct response is thank you. I have recently had and resonated with, if you really don't want to be racist or sexist, you have to be anti-racist, or I'm assuming anti-sexist. So how can we move to a world where if someone says something offensive, they can hear something like, please don't say that, it's offensive, and be able to respond sincerely with thank you? As people think, I can tell you the mantra of our team, our leadership team here, that I've had the pleasure of being joining in for just a few weeks in a sitting position. My boss would say, let people see your response and not your reaction. And I've sort of felt, because sometimes you're just a little more aware, and maybe just a little bit lose your patience, and to just be thoughtful about your responses is something that I'm finding that I'm thinking and being intentional about every day. But I'm curious to hear what other panelists think, like in 1 minute, because we have to wrap up with a bang.
What I think is, like, when they talk about, like, in tennis, you're on 2 different sides of a net, and my experience happens on my side of the net, and your experience happens on your side of the net. And so the things that I'm feeling, if I tell you, like, this is offensive to me, I just need you to believe me, because that's the feeling that I'm having. And you can never have my experience, just like I can never have your experience. And so I think, like, putting it in that context, because a lot of people, when you say something's offensive, they try to, like, rationalize why it's not offensive and it shouldn't be offensive to you. But I think that you should just, like, agree that I have my feelings and you have your feelings, and we can't tell each other what our feelings are. So to honor that and just say thank you is really the way to move forward.
And I know that time is very, very limited. I will say that recently, a close friend of mine who I've met not too long ago is transgender, and as I learned more and more about his lived-in experiences, I was cautious in terms of how I can ask these lived experiences, just to have a growth mindset, for me to have a better understanding. And fortunately, there was an open space where he understood that I want to ask the right meaningful questions, but I want to be as respectful as possible. And those are the type of healthy dialogues we should all be having a warm, welcoming dialogue. A lot of, as I said, a lot of my friends are Caucasian males. I grew up in a Caucasian male town in upstate New York, and having the gumption and the comfort for them to reach out and ask questions that, if I read it and I didn't know their intentions, it may read offensive, but I know they're just having a growth mindset and trying to learn about the lived-in experiences. And I recently had this the same conversation with someone who's transgender, but it's really imperative that we shine light to the conversation and not let fury and frustration deter us from what our North Star is: an equal shot at success. All we're asking for is an equal shot. We're not asking for a handout. Someone bet on me to work in technology. I had a very different background, policy and law, and here I am in engineering because someone put a bet on me. And someone's bet on everyone on this panel. And so, I think for us, it's really to make sure that we're having these conversations that may appear to be frustrating, because there's a lot of frustration deep down inside. You're now just realizing this, right? But at the same time, people want to have a growth mindset and really learn from our lived experiences. So.
Thank you. So we are at the top of the hour. Please, thank you for joining us, and feel free to jump off. But we have to end this session. Usually I would say, is there anything, I'm just gonna let you have a minute of saying something about just something random. Ohi, do you want to start off?
I guess I'll just go back to my thesis statement. I think even for like the last question, the forget your feelings mindset and just call yourself an ist and go from there, I think will go a long way for like audience interactions.
Cool. Tina, I have to call people out again.
I was going to take my mic off because I knew my dogs were getting ready to bark. But I will say, you know, I'm the type of person that focuses on gratitude. So first and foremost, I'm grateful for this conversation, for the openness, for the opportunity. And I hope that conversations like these continue because it's the only way that we get to a change. So thank you for having me.
I'll say welcome on behalf of Dr. Lungren and the Stanford people, but Nate.
Well, first, I want to thank, of course, everyone on this panel, as well as Stanford, and most importantly, certainly my friend Tina, who reached out for me to join this panel. You know, Tina's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that I'm always both humbled and flattered to see. Especially in such a complicated space, cloud computing. So I want to first acknowledge the hard work because certainly at times the hard work of many can be lost in the noise. And so I want to personally thank my dear friend Tina for that. And of course, you know, having an open mind, you know, for folks who want to have that growth mindset, we're here to support each other. It requires a movement of us. I think it's time for us to take time to self-reflect, all of us. It's a very challenging time for us. It's a very challenging time for the American people. It's a very challenging time for the history of the world. You know, not only COVID or these racial tensions, but, you know, heck, we just saw a president get impeached in the beginning of the year that got that got distracted in the noise of this. You know, it's a very difficult time for our leadership. And so, you know, those who have the gumption to go out there and articulate and learn and feel comfortable leaving their comfort zone, I commend you for that. And I want to thank everyone again. And I certainly look forward to having the next steps of how we can drive together.
Thank you. Dr. Davis?
Yeah, again, I want to echo the sentiments of thank you for allowing this conversation to happen and creating this space for it. I am more optimistic now than I have been in a very long time about the fact that we could actually be in a place as a country where we're ready to start making changes. And so a lot of people have said this over the past week, but this time does feel different to me. I having conversations like these with people in the future who are really developing our future, I think is very important. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of that.
You're welcome. I guess I'll go then. The host really will take over, Dr. Lungren, but thank you again for joining us. Actually, I usually, of late, I decline any diversity talks, and I think I only agreed to this because, you know, I just felt that me and Matt have a pretty good relationship, and that this was coming from a place of love and true, you know, wanting to grow, and so I appreciate that. And I'm glad I did it too, because this talk, I'm glad it was also like recorded because there's just so much rich conversations that happened in this 1 hour. And, you know, just slightly more than a year ago when I was a fellow, I mean, you know, like Dr. Lungren here, I'm an interventional radiologist. There are less than 20 Black female interventional radiologists in the US. And I was, you know, like most of us, you know, found myself being one of the first, and this is not whether you're the only person in the room or you're the first person to take something. And, you know, I had a really bad encounter, a racial encounter with a patient, and you know, it just really crushed me, to be honest, and I felt so bad. And I was like, I remember thinking that I should go back home because there's so many people who need my services that, you know, that I could serve, and there was gratitude, and it just really took to was really crashing. And, you know, my boss at that time was very, very heartbroken. And he said, you know, I didn't just realize, he just hadn't seen it this way. And most of us on this panel can relate to this, that, you know, people, till this, you know, video of George Floyd, I mean, most people couldn't believe that these things happen, you know. And I'm telling you, the most important thing he did was just stop the email threads and just talk to me and say, you know, I know, and this is surprising to me, and it wasn't because he's tried to get me on a diversity committee or tell me, give me advice on what to do, and just say, and he didn't even tell me he was going to stop all these email threads with patient advocates, and it just meant the world for me. And so to also receive the same message from him 2 weeks ago just also still meant the world for me, even if I'm in a place where I actually work and take care of Black patients, and it's fantastic. So don't think that you need to do so much. Even just little things can just make a whole difference. That's my final word. Thank you, Dr. Lungren and the Stanford team.
Everyone have a fantastic summer. Be well.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for joining. Thanks for this conversation. And this is the beginning. This is not the end. This is the beginning. And appreciate everybody's insights. Thank you.